We're on the same
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
about the past and about the future.
Welcome back to Draftvice. My name is Walter, and today is tonight. Now it's part two, right? Part two to the Marcus Harvey episode. Oh, Marcus Harvey, he's such a nice guy. And yes, we're bringing him on again. We just ran really long with the first episode, so I'm like, you know what, Marcus, come, we'll split this in two. We'll talk Browns exclusively between us Brownies, and then we'll give people what they really came for, the wide receiver talk. Yes, the NFL draft is coming up just a couple of weeks away, and so we decided to talk about our favorite wide receivers. So now let's bring them on. You can follow him at Marcus Harvey _, and yes, today we talk wide receivers. All right, so since we're talking about first-round wide receivers, let's just break it down. All right, top. Who's your number one? Even though I think we hinted at this. Maybe we hinted at it before the recording. I don't remember anymore. But yeah, so let's break down how many round one receivers do you have, or true round one, like the real first round grade?
Yeah, so I have four.
Four.
I know some people have five, up to six even, but for me, it's that top four. It's Jalen Waddle, Rashad Bateman, Devonta Smith, and Jamar Chase in that order in my preference.
Oh.
So yeah, I know it's not for everybody, but just outside of that tier, and I mean very, very, very close to that, is Elijah Moore, just sitting a little bit outside of that. Terrence Marshall, I think very highly of him, and Diami Brown out of North Carolina. Both offer very different skill sets, Marshall being the youngest of that crew, and is a terrific player in his own right. I think if he had another Joe Burrow, that production would be through the roof, and he would be talked about with those top four guys, but it's a little bit harder to project without that production.
See, actually, yeah, let's start with your tier two here, because that's actually where there's a lot of meat and chunks, and then we'll get into the whole, like, oh, Jamar Chase is the fourth wide receiver. This is not one I've heard before. But I actually don't hate it. That's actually kind of a nice. It's a little bit refresher when people kind of go like, and listen, being the fourth overall receiver in this draft class is not bad. You're still a first round receiver, but let's talk a little bit about Elijah Moore, because I liked him. Like, he popped off on tape to me so much. You're watching like J.C. Horn film, and here's Elijah Moore just blowing up the game, and you're like, dude, who's this little dude who's just like running out of the backfield and catching stuff out the slot and just breaking shit away? So Elijah Moore, Terrence Marshall's one of those guys who had way better, we were saying before, 2019 tape than 2020 tape. They tried putting him in the slot a little bit more, I guess, because they didn't have a Joe Burrow anymore in 2020, and he did not really fit well in that slot position. Maybe if he goes to a different offense and he knows he has a real quarterback. I know he opted out before the Alabama game. I know there was a little bit of questions about that. People wanted to see him go against them, but I kind of agree with what you're saying, is like, you didn't have Joe Burrow anymore. And I made the mistake last year with I still had Justin Jefferson as a first round guy, but I made the mistake of maybe having him ranked lower, one or two spots lower, because we didn't see him do this. We saw him do a little bit of stuff outside the slot, but he was so productive in the slot. And then not only that, you had all these other great pieces around him. It made you question, like, oh, maybe it's the other pieces helping him be so great, not just like these individual traits. Which, listen, he was great at high pointing the ball. He was great at getting open from the slot, and you just didn't get to see him do much of the stuff on the outside because they had Terrence Marshall and they had Jamar Chase. I'm trying not to make that mistake this year with Terrence Marshall, because now because this is like one of the things that people are saying now is like, oh, well, Terrence Marshall had now Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase there, and he was getting thrown to by Joe Burrow. And it's like, well, I made that mistake last year. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on me again. Not going to happen this year. And like I said, I went back and watched Terrence Marshall, and again, very good downfield guy. It's the funny thing is if you only watch the 2020 tape and then you went ahead and saw his pro day times, you would have been like, whoa, like, this doesn't look like the guy who I saw on tape. And then you go ahead and watch 2019 and you're like, oh, this is a guy. It kind of does look like the guy I saw on tape. So maybe he does match the traits a little bit.
Yeah, and I definitely would agree with that statement. For me, I started off studying his 2020 tape, and I turned away, and I wasn't really all about it. Didn't like a lot what I saw. Didn't see the speed that he tested. Didn't see the jumps that he posted on his film. But then I turned on the 2019 game, even the national championship and whatnot, and working on the same field as Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson just reminded me that Joe Burrow was doing some very special things with those three weapons at his disposal. So I just hope that he gets a great fit where somebody is able to push down the ball down the field, and he's able to not just be a slot limited player, can play outside different places where he can truly flourish. One of my favorite spots, not as a Browns fan, but as a football fan, is having him go to Baltimore. I think that's one of the situations where he can be most successful. Lamar Jackson and the offense that they run with Greg Roman is deeply predicated on deep passes and making sure that the defense is respecting that ability for the wide receiver to go over the top and threaten the defense down the field so that they can get favorable numbers in the running game. Largely, that was one of the reasons they selected Marquise Hollywood Brown in round 1 a couple years ago and have tried to force him into that role where his physical profile and athletic ability isn't best meant for that true number 1 ability. If you add Terrence Marshall at his size of 6'4" on the outside and Marquise Brown in the middle as a slot player, that offense takes a new step to, where Lamar Jackson before threw 5,000 or not for that many yards, but 50 touchdowns in his MVP year.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there with Terrence Marshall, especially you're putting him up at split end because you can't have Hollywood Brown playing the X role in an offense, which you like having him try to line up. And again, like him being the main focus, he had a lot of drops this year. Maybe if he's not the main focus, but he's like kind of an additional option, he's taken the top off of everything. Now you have a guy, like you're saying, Terrence Marshall, to be able to line up at the line of scrimmage. He could beat press coverage because he's done it before. And again, yeah, sometimes he didn't always get the best cornerback back when he was playing with Jamar Chase because, you're playing with Jamar Chase and Jamar Chase is bullying people and just it's like, I'm going to take your lunch money and go, dude. And that was just how Jamar Chase played. And then also, like, I definitely see what you're saying. I think I probably would win Titans as well. To free up A.J. Brown, they lost Corey Davis. They run a lot of those, again, deep play action routes. So
both are excellent fits. I think he would be very excited to be on either team. He'd be an immediate contributor, be able to not have to carry the full burden by himself when situated in the offense. I think he would be the number 1 in Baltimore just by his physical profile and the expectations of an X receiver in Baltimore. But I like that A.J. Brown pick as well. I think for the Browns and Rashad Bateman, that's the biggest threat for them if they want to do that. But for me, the Titans have a big gaping hole at right tackle. Kendall Lamb, who caught a touchdown pass against them this past season, I wish him the best, and he filled in well for us when we needed him, especially on those goal line trick plays. But right tackle after the Isaiah Wilson situation is still a big need of theirs. So I think they got to figure something out there first.
Yeah, the Isaiah Wilson thing, trading him, then he gets released by Miami, and then Dennis Kelly they cut, they just signed him to an extension last year, and then they're like, yeah, bye Dennis Kelly, even though we extended you last year, we're going to get rid of you. They cleared out they just reformatted their roster. They're just like, we're rebooting this hard drive. We didn't like what we saw. So I kind of agree with you there. I do think tackle's going to be on the board for them at they pick like 20, I think they pick 18 or 19 in that weird range, right? A few spots ahead of the Browns. I still think wide receiver is still in play. I think because Kendall Lamb actually, I think, is maybe a little bit underrated. I think he was actually better than Hubbard a lot of times at tackle, as the swing tackle role. Now, I'm kind of thinking back to the year prior when Freddie Kitchens was the head coach, and there was that one game where they played the Steelers and Hubbard was out, and they had to play Kendall Lamb, and Kendall Lamb played better at right tackle than Hubbard did the whole season. And then they had Greg Robinson, and that was the best games. That was the game that Baker Mayfield had like 3 touchdowns against the Steelers, and then like a year later, not the best time ever. But like my point was, listen, we have to get Greg Robinson and Kendall Lamb back at some point. I'm kidding, of course.
Right.
But like he showed that he can at least do. I think he's much better as a pass protector than he's a run blocker. So, given that run blocking is kind of a big thing in Tennessee, especially when you have Derrick Henry, and they've kind of changed up that offensive line quite a bit. They no longer have Conklin because thankfully, the Browns signed him. Thank you, Andrew Berry, for that one. Thank you. That's one he should get an award for, because that was like, I did not think that was going to happen, and then they made this amazing deal that's like a 3-year, almost kind of fully guaranteed tackle deal, and it's like, oh, this is good. This is thinking outside the box. Like, listen, you're going to get all your money on this deal. It's a 3-year deal, so you could hit free agency again as a young offensive tackle. And then not only that, but we can extend you, and because we're going to go ahead and add void years on it. I mean, that was some magic. That was brilliant on part of Andrew Berry. I loved that move. So, yeah. What was the other wide receiver we were going to talk about at this spot? We had Marshall, Elijah Moore, who, dude, that guy's just electric. That guy, I love watching him. He's like one of those guys where it's like he pops on like I said, you watch other teams, you're watching other players, and he pops on. You're like,
yeah.
And he's a guy who I kind of like for the Browns if they trade back, if he falls a little bit in the second round, because he has that electric ability. Now, the one worry I have with Elijah Moore, he didn't really line up on the outside. And that's kind of the red flag kind of issue with him. He's small. He's 5'9". He had a great pro day. Had a lot of good measurables on the pro day. But again, he's 5'9", really never lined up on the outside. He can be this electric freak player for them. And we've seen him make plays somewhat downfield, but really not as often deep downfield. Like, we're not talking about 70 yards. We're talking about like in the 15 to 20-yard range, which is a lot of the meat comes on these plays anyway. And again, for the Browns, you still currently have Odell Beckham. You still currently have Jarvis Landry, although I guess I don't know if you want to touch on that conversation at some point, because I know that's a big debate amongst Browns fans and then people who cover the Browns. I think that's kind of an interesting, almost kind of civil war that kind of is going on at this point. Yeah. It's like, which side do you take? And it's like, this could be way better handled. So it was for the tier 2 guys you had, it was Moore, Marshall. Who was the third?
Diami Brown.
Diami's fun too. Good deep guy.
Yeah, so where you were talking a little bit about Elijah Moore winning that 15 to 20-yard range, Diami Brown averaged over 25 yards per reception in college, which is just not something you usually see. And I think that is a credit to Sam Howell a little bit and the offense that they were running there. But to have him in Cleveland would be a great situation. I think for any offense that gets Diami Brown, it's an outside profile wide receiver, largely lined up only on the left side in college. I don't believe that to be his limitation. I think that was an offensive scheme limitation, but he's running right past cornerbacks, building speed and winning downfield. My biggest concern with him is contested catches. So in the NFL, where people are faster a little bit and get up closer to you as a receiver, how are you able to handle and fight through that contact?
Yeah, he also ran kind of a limited route tree, and like you said, he lined up on one side, which is a very common thing in college. But you don't want it being the there was a Vikings wide receiver not too long ago who went in the first round, and he only lined up on one side of the field. And then we found out a couple years later that the reason why he lined up on one side of the field was because that's where all the coaches were, and they had to tell him what play they were running and how to run it. And you don't want it to be that issue. So that was an issue for it was what's his name, Laquan Treadwell.
Yeah, I hadn't ever heard about that before. So always something good, learning something new every day, like I said at the beginning of the show. But for me, I think wherever he gets situated will bring dynamite to an offense and ability to go over the top. Really impressive as a run blocker too. I noticed very consistent and make meaningful blocks out on the edge. One of the reasons why Michael Carter and Javonte Williams were able to have so much success running the ball is because when they got to the outside left side, Diami Brown usually had that DB or the safety well controlled so that they could just continue on their way.
So let's bounce back to your top 4, right? Because it sounded like there's some controversy in the top 4, right? So let's start with number 1 overall. I think he's actually number 1 on both our boards. So that's the good thing. It's not much controversy. And I think there's other people who have the same sentiment. Jalen Waddle. Dear God, that guy is electric.
Yeah. bless him. I hope his ankle recovers, because to have the pleasure of watching him is one of the best things a football fan can wish for. He's just moving in double speed where everybody else is not. And so, with the offensive system that he had and the weapons that surrounded him, he was really able to flourish. But I don't know the exact numbers, but if you look at his average reception, like average yards per reception and frequency at which he was scoring touchdowns, like per every 17 receptions or something crazy like that, it just boggles my mind that he wouldn't be wide receiver one for more people. That's not a discredit to the rest of the three on the board. I think they're all extremely talented players, and it just comes down to which flavor you prefer. But when I watch Jalen Waddle and his ability to not only run past people, but elevate over people, to catch contested balls, to run bubbles, slants, screens, posts, deep routes, I cannot see anything else other than Tyreek Hill, the player. Not to compare them, the player wise, but play style and how they play on the field. That's where I draw my comparisons from.
There's very few guys with the same lateral agility and vertical agility, like vertical speed and lateral agility, as Jalen Waddle. It just doesn't usually come along very often. Like, he's got the oily hips to just kind of move back and forth, and you're like, he just went that way, and he did not turn any direction. Like, he just moves
I think
like a ghost.
If you're trying to watch Jalen Waddle and understand a little bit more about him, just watch him on some kick returns. I know that's where he hurt his ankle, but a little bit of that side-to-side fluidity. There's a couple punt returns against LSU in 2019 and then in 2020 where he's just running laps around people, even running backwards to pick up speed to move forwards. And against LSU, where they had special teamers like Tracy McGrath, who went to the Senior Bowl and ran a 4.38 at their pro day, he's running past them all, and that to me just boggles my mind. I wish nothing but success for him in the NFL and a full and happy recovery. But for me, if he got to play with Justin Herbert in a Chargers uniform for Los Angeles, that is by far my biggest wish as a football fan for this entire mock draft season, other than getting Penei Sewell or Rashawn Slater for Joe Burrow. But to give Justin Herbert the weapons of Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Jalen Waddle, and then have them play Kansas City twice a year, that's a money game. That will be must-watch TV.
So I do a midnight mock draft every Monday. So I'll probably, when I get done with this at some point, I'll probably go ahead and record that. And I do that as a live stream. I had Jalen Waddle in one of those drafts go at 13 to the Chargers because, like, the way some boards can fall and how teams will value some of these things, because you're trying to project how some of these teams might value the ankle. He could easily fall to 13 to the Chargers, and that would be the perfect pick for them because Keenan Allen's get a little bit older. You would now get a young guy who kind of like has that, like, he could just be a whole different kind of player for them. Even if you think they do need offensive line, which, by the way, yes, the Chargers need an offensive line. They don't draft it in the first round, like, I think ever. Like, I can't remember the last time the Chargers decided that, oh, yes, offensive line, let's do that now. So, again, I like Jalen Waddle a lot. We could spend 20,000 hours talking about Jalen Waddle because he's just fun. He's fun to watch. He's got that electric. Like, when I was saying Elijah Moore was kind of like electric and fun, he's got a different level of electricity to him. Like, it's like, say, like he's like regular wattage, and this guy's like super turbocharged wattage. So, yes, I agree with it. I don't know how teams are going to feel about the ankle, especially not seeing him at the pro day, like not getting any more like visual on him to see if the ankle. I think the real question is with the ankle inhibiting his ability to move and kind of like, has this affected your mobility? So, but then again, we saw Hollywood.
If NFL teams want to let him fall to 26, I won't mind one bit at all.
Please, yes.
I've been tweeting a little bit about let's just make that the energy and create that conversation before it actually happens. But yeah,
all down for.
That would be lovely, but I think half of that at 13 is a much more realistic situation if that ankle does arise. But I will not fault any team for taking him and the player that they saw since he was a true freshman.
So let's go to the other guys on this list. Your number 2 is Rashad Bateman. I think he's a lot of times I think he's usually the fourth guy on this list for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I like Rashad Bateman. He's one of those guys, like we were saying before, had that weird kind of like 2020 did not work well for him. Now, he actually had caught COVID, I think either before the season or right during the season. I can't remember. But he actually was dealing with the effects of COVID. He was playing like 10 pounds lighter. He was running a lot more out of the slot because I don't think they could run much better. I think because the quarterback there was not all that great.
So it was the same quarterback that they had the year before, but for whatever reason or the situation with COVID and the shortened offseason and how the Big Ten handled it all, Tanner Morgan played significantly not as well as he did the year before, and that came to a downfall for both Bateman and Chris Ottman-Bell, his teammate at Minnesota. For me, like when I watched Bateman, I try to think about a situation where he was in an offense similar to Jamar Chase with Justin Jefferson and Terrence Marshall, and try to envision that player and what he could look like. Because I think for Jamar Chase, I love the player. He's physical, but with that comes a little bit concern for me how that handles in the NFL. Bateman, I think, does a much better job separating on routes, getting out of breaks, catching. Both of them are excellent at the catch point, but for me, Bateman is just a little bit more of my flavor. But on my grading scale, they both are separated by half a point, and in between them is Devonta Smith. So the real gap for me is Waddle, and then the rest.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think because Waddle just has that different level of athleticism, and like you were saying with Tyreek Hill, I think the comp there is right, though, with the aspect of the difference in the athleticism of Tyreek Hill to everybody else. That's kind of what Jalen Waddle is compared to the rest of this class. It's just like a different level of movement ability. With Rashad Bateman, I kind of also, like you mentioned before, it was kind of a shock that he came in not as tall as maybe some people thought, but he plays big. I'm just looking over it because I watched the Michigan game, the Auburn game. I'm seeing if there was something in here that I really liked that to throw in as this. I just see this from the Auburn game. He showed a sick release on the outside that throws the DB off. It's like 5 minutes into the first quarter, and then the next play, the pass gets thrown behind the line of scrimmage, takes it 30 or 40 yards. He had some great run after the catch. Like that was something that was a very big thing for him. Was just like, and even still when he was running out of the slot, and I think people this year saw his run after the catch this year, and they were like, oh, he's not that good at this. And it's like, no. Like, he's dealing with, like, health issues coming back from COVID. He's not really playing in the spot that really he'd probably be best at and probably is more valuable at. When he was playing at split end, when he was playing on the outside, even when you move him around, getting him the ball in his hands in 2019 was so dangerous that like he would take a ball 30, 40 yards almost to the house. And compared to this year, he was still getting yardage from being in the slot. They just had to put him there because, like you said, they couldn't game plan as much. Whatever they were doing as far as the offense went, they said, you know what, you're not feeling well. We think this is best for you. We're gonna run you out of the slot. Jamar Chase or Devontae Smith. Which one do you want to talk about first?
We'll do Chase.
Because like Chase is a dude who plays big. He's not as big as people think. Like he's bulkier. He's a dense dude, but he's brutal. He's physical. He's like, and he was definitely like. Listen, when I talk about like chain move, like guys who were movers of the offense, right? Guys who were like the bus driver, like Joe Burrow and Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jamar Chase in 2019 were the drivers of that offense. And Jamar Chase just did things that were really good. Like I appreciated the game of Jamar Chase. He could pretty much line up anywhere you want him to on the line of scrimmage. Like I said, I think he's going to be brutalizing guys and using that physicality to his advantage. Now, granted, NFL, you're going to deal with a lot of physical guys too, but he's also doing it in the SEC in 2019, so not a COVID year, not a year where you're like, oh, well, it's COVID year and it's not the best year ever. This is a year where it's like, listen, 2019 SEC competition, and they all knew to key in on Jamar Chase, and he was just like, He showed great footwork, contested catch ability, the ability to just get separation, and I do think his testing times I was a little bit more shocked by. I thought he was more like in the 4.4s, maybe even like I wouldn't have been shocked if he came in at 4.5s, but it wasn't like he was slow, and he was still running by guys every once in a while. He just wasn't. His key trait is not I'm gonna beat you deep like this. He did it he did it a lot of the time by using really good route running, like his feet's really good. And he would go ahead and throw in a jab step here or stutter, like kind of get people to think he's taking a hitch and then go. And his just ability to, again, he was just brutal to try to cover for a lot of DBs. Even if he was in double coverage, this guy was just, I think he's a guy who could be moved anywhere you want. Now the big question is he still that guy after a year of not playing football? Is he still that guy? Was he just spending his whole time getting ready to, do athletic testing because, he knew since September he opted out and he's like, you know what, I'm going to go run 40s every day until I test super well. Maybe this will show up better than my game tape does. So,
yeah. And I think Jamar Chase will come into the NFL and be an instant contributor, just like his former teammate was Justin Jefferson. I really like him to the Lions at 7. Losing Kenny Golladay and being able to replace that with Jamar Chase is, to me, an upgrade. And that's not to slice Kenny Golladay at all, but when you consider health, age, and different factors, the team gets better when Jamar Chase steps on that roster. Which for Jared Goff, we'll see what that looks like outside of Sean McVay in this new experiment, if that's where they choose to go. But Jamar Chase, yeah, like you said, whenever I watch him run routes, like just think of a basketball player, the way his feet move and the way he tries to break coverages and different things, just really impressive for me. Jamar Chase, contested catch ability, a lot of back shoulder balls, and just out physicaled everybody that he came across. That included people who were drafted into the NFL, even as first round picks. And I think Jamar Chase is very talented. But if we look at Devonta Smith, I think Devonta Smith does a little bit different, goes about the receiver position very differently. And that's when it comes down to these flavors and what kind of wide receiver you prefer in different situations, where Jamar Chase will come up and jam the DB off the line to then go run a route. Devonta Smith just won't let you touch him, and I don't know how he does it. I don't think I can explain it. My best recommendation is go watch his Heisman highlight tape, where he's just running past people and winning a Heisman Trophy as a wide receiver. But yeah, incredible. The top 4, the NFL is in very good hands. The 7-on-7 high school, college environment is really starting to come out when you look at this year's draft, last year's draft with CeeDee Lamb, Henry Ruggs, Justin Jefferson, and that crew. And then when you look at next year's draft with the 2 Ohio State guys, Garrett Wilson, the kid from Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, who returned back to school. And then at Georgia with George Pickens, and then David Bell at Purdue and Chris Ottman-Bell at Minnesota. That's just largely one conference, and we're not even out of receivers that have a real chance of going in that same tier as these guys.
Yeah, what's funny is I know people have already kind of said, like, oh, next year's wide receiver class might not be as good, but you're still going to have players. Like, you're still going to you have guys who develop. So there's guys who might come out, like, we didn't know Jamar Chase 2-3 years, like in 2018. Like, we didn't know he was going to be Jamar Chase of 2019. And there's always guys who develop.
There's not a lot of Jamar Chase explosions in 1 year and then an opt-out. So I hold him to a very special category. But
Devontae Smith even. Devontae Smith.
Yeah, right. Who was a contributor at Alabama for 3 seasons, catching national championship, winning our SEC championship, winning drives and whatnot, to then win a Heisman. Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see how this next tier progresses, and I'm really excited. But these top 4 guys, wherever they're situated, I think they're above a scheme fit, which is why I group them together as opposed to the next group of 3 and then further down my list, is because these top 4 guys will go on whatever team that they're on, and they're going to produce on week 1. They'll all be contributors.
That's the perfect way to put it. These guys, those 4, could be any team, any scheme, anywhere. And if you're, by the way, if your coach couldn't figure out how to use these 4 guys, there's a problem with the coach, not a problem with the player. Like, that's how good these 4 guys are. I agree with you there. The scheme diversity is perfect, and their ability to line up pretty much. Even if like you're worried about maybe Jalen Waddle, you know what? No, I'm sorry, because even Jalen Waddle again is such an electric player. Like, yes, did they get a lot of reps of him on the outside? Because this year, he didn't play as many games because of the injury. You still, like, I mean, you could see it. You could see what the issue is going to be for other teams trying to, say, jam him at the line of scrimmage when he's got that level of speed. And, again, you can kind of cover him up. You don't have to play him at split end. There's 2 other wide receiver positions usually in an offense. So you're not necessarily having to worry about that all that much anyway.
Yeah, and if you get Jalen Waddle moving pre-snap in some motion, good things are going to happen. Really, really good things are going to happen. Whether you get the ball to him within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage or over 25 yards down the field, Jalen Waddle, I just hope that he goes anywhere but Las Vegas.
Yeah, please don't do that again. Although, like, I mean, Derek Carr can't ruin 2 really fast wide receivers, can he?
Hopefully, if they were put together in this theoretical world where 2 fast guys can line up next to each other, I hope that system works. That would be my hypothesis, but I don't really know how.
I would be intrigued to see that. I would be very intrigued to see a team with both Henry Ruggs and Jalen Waddle. I just would maybe want it to be a team not run by John Gruden. So that might be the caveat there. Is I don't know if I want John Gruden running that team, but like a guy who could really take the top off and a guy who can clear, like you would basically have one guy taking the top off and one guy clearing the bottom out. You couldn't cover both of those guys. Let's jump now to outside of these top 7 because we spent so much time on the top 7, these first rounders, and most of the draft is not built just on first rounders alone. Granted, some of these guys might fall to the second round. Who's next on your list? Outside of Diami and Marshall and Elijah Moore.
Yeah.
I got a couple other guys later on that I'll throw in at different spots, but who's next on your spot list?
Yeah, for me, that next guy on the list is somebody who also opted out in 2020 and one that I am very familiar with from watching in college. Not that I'm a Michigan fan, but watching his teammate who's now on the Browns, Donovan Peoples-Jones, the wide receiver I'm referring to is Nico Collins.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's an incredible physical specimen, a large body like Terrence Marshall, who's not quite as fast, but suffered because of the offensive system that he was surrounded by. One of the reasons why Donovan Peoples-Jones fell to the pick that he did last year in that draft is because Shea Patterson was quarterback for the Michigan Wolverines, and that didn't really work out and was a hindrance to their development and ability to produce. So Nico Collins, I think, he came to the Senior Bowl and bullied people. He caught the ball really well. I think for as much of an ex wide receiver or a big body wide receiver that wins in contested catches, he has the ability to win over the top with speed. I don't think that was ever able to be utilized or seen on film because the quarterback situation was so poor. But, I like the idea of putting him in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, or Cleveland is another favorite spot for him. I'm really hoping that the Browns can connect with him and reconnect him with Donovan Peoples-Jones. Big guys who run really fast really interest me for this situation.
Why would that be? That sounds so ridiculous. Big guys who can run fast, maybe they can catch. Yes, that sounds like it sounds like something you'd want in the
I think that's a good situation to be in.
It's a good starting point.
Yeah.
I tend to be a fan of the small guys who can run fast and catch, but there's a lot of those, and they don't always pan out. There's a couple, though, I think, in this draft that could work out. I think there's going to be a lot of those in this draft, actually. Like, there's the, Dwayne Eskridge, Jalen Darden. We already talked a bit about Elijah Moore. There's also Ron Dale Moore. Because of the Moore twins. They're just super fast and electric. But Rondale Moore measured in at 5'7", as did Jalen Darden. Dwayne Eskridge is like 25 years old almost. He's 24, but he's going to be 25, I think, by the end of next season. So you're talking about, again, older prospect that kind of worries you a bit. But any of those guys interest you, of the speedy guys, the short guys? The Munchkins of the world.
Yeah, if I'm looking at that little crew there, literally and figuratively, Rondale Moore is the one that interests me the most. I'm not a huge Rondale Moore supporter. I know that there are a lot of people who like him as a round 1 pick or a top of round 2. I think that's a bit rich in my opinion. Just to not because of his injury history or his production that's being so artificially created at Purdue, because he was just doing his team's job at what they were asking him to do. So I commend him for that. But just the physical profile at 5'7", if we're talking about analytics and the integration and how that works in football, there's very few people period in NFL history that have made that profile work. I do believe that Rondale Moore, if given the right situation, can see a little bit of running back and wide receiver and that flexibility to do it all at any time. I have vivid flashbacks to when he single-handedly beat Ohio State in 2018 to spoil that season for the Buckeyes, just running laps around Sean Wade in coverage. As he was running routes and just being stronger and faster than everybody else on the field when there were Chase Young and all these other NFL players on the field. He was the best player on the field that day, and that was as a true freshman. So I hold that very special in my mind when I talk about Rondale Moore. I think one of his places that he can be most successful is filling in Carolina for Curtis Samuel, who moved on to the Washington football team. If you're able to give him to Joe Brady, newly acquired Sam Darnold, that wide receiver crew with Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, and Rondale Moore to fit in that slot as a running back, and just theoretically imagine a situation where Sam Darnold's in the shotgun and on his right is Christian McCaffrey and on his left is Rondale Moore. I don't care who your linebackers are or who your defensive backs are that are covering them. Those are two of the most unguardable football players in the league at the start of next season.
No, I agree. I like that a lot, especially because, like you're saying before, Curtis Samuel ran a lot of routes out the slot. That would probably be where Rondale Moore is kind of running if he's not running out of the backfield. I think that's a perfect situation for him. You can get him on the move a bit. The fact that he's 5'7" is kind of worrisome. The fact that his best production hasn't come since 2018, the injury history, I think all those things kind of to play into that. I agree. I don't think he's a first rounder. I wouldn't even take him in the top 50 at this point because of those things, because he's probably more of a gadget guy. You're probably looking at him for either, like, listen, can we just get him on deep routes? Can we get – he's a lot more limited of a player, whereas maybe, again, like we're talking before about, you're looking 10 picks back or a round back, you might get a version of that player later on down the line. For instance, Jalen Darden out of North Texas didn't play a high level of competition. His lateral movement is really good. Like, if there's a guy who, like, he doesn't have the long speed of Jalen Waddle, but he has that hip fluidity of Jalen Waddle where he can just move side to side and totally juke out a guy. Kind of reminds me of a shorter Deontay Johnson when he came out, where it's not necessarily that he's got the long speed, but he could probably stack you really well. He did play on the outside down there. Now he's not going to be playing on the outside in the NFL. But again, if you're looking for maybe a guy who's going to be a gadget receiver for you, who you're going to be getting, 10 to 15 touches a game out of, like, hey, we're going to get him in the slot, we'll get him out of the backfield, we'll have him as a returner. Maybe we can play him at flanker if we're really trying to push our luck. But again, I think that, maybe we'll get him on a crossing route again. But if you're 5'7", depends on the player who's throwing you the crossing route. I don't know if I want Baker Mayfield throwing a crossing route to a 5'7" receiver. I don't think that does you very well, because you're now you have a 6-foot quarterback throwing over 6'4" linemen to now throw to a 7-foot, not 7 foot, a 5'7" wide receiver. So there's teams that are going to be limited in what they could utilize him for. The one guy who I mentioned before, Dwayne Eskridge, I actually kind of liked his tape. Like, again, old dude. I say old dude, like, he's going to be retiring in a few years from the NFL anyway. But he is older, and that does make a big difference. But he lined up on the outside a lot. He actually dealt with, like, a lot of press man, and not just, like, press man, like, oh, we're going to stand next to you and say hello, and you could hear our breath. But, like, yes, there's a lot of that in college where they're playing press man, but really what they're doing is they're standing next to you being like, how are you doing today? Can I take your order? I'm going to be working at Applebee's later. and then Dwayne Eskridge will run by you. No, like they're actually trying to jam him. Like CMU actually tries to teach their cornerbacks to jam, and again, like not that CMU is going to have the best corners in the world, but again, they're at least trying to teach the technique, and you're seeing him try to get around it. So you're seeing him try to and then another guy who went to the Senior Bowl, who had a really good week at the Senior Bowl. I still think he's third round pick for me because of the age issue, because of the late late rise in his production. This he's 5'9", he's not the tallest receiver. Does have some legit speed. Like Jalen Darden, I think came in at like 4.44, which is not what you expect. But again, like before, I'm saying like he's more lateral movement. He's long speed, and they utilize him in a lot of different ways. So I kind of liked Eskridge in that kind of if you're looking for an outside guy, and also guy who's maybe a few inches taller. If you're looking for a taller guy who's probably going to go earlier than he probably should, Anthony Schwartz, Auburn guy.
If we're talking about age, he's one of the youngest players in this draft.
Yes.
As if we're talking about Dwayne Eskridge and then talking about Anthony Schwartz as guys who can run really fast and would benefit from certain offenses over another. Yeah, Anthony Schwartz will just be turning 21 like 2 months after the draft, which to me is miraculous to think about, because very rarely do you see in draft covers like the 2.0 number for prospects that are ready to go to the NFL or ready to produce. That's one of the reasons why I think Penei Sewell is so special, is he'll be 20 years old throughout the first couple of months of the NFL and when he starts to play. And one of the reasons why the Browns picked Jedrick Wills over some of the other guys at that time was a little bit of that age concern, where Jed was a little bit younger than the rest of the crew, and so they gave him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, that was a whole. I loved Jedrick Wills' tape coming out too. He was like so I actually had him as my number one tackle last year, and I know people.
Wow.
I know some people had Andrew Thomas ahead of him. I know some people had Tristan Wirfs ahead of him. And listen, I know Tristan Wirfs did really well this year. I think if Jedrick Wills was playing right tackle this year from the get-go, he would have had as good of a year as Tristan Wirfs. The fact that he switched sides, I think, changed a lot for him. And he still was a great pass blocker this year. I think he was actually still a pretty solid run blocker. I think the penalties were really what killed him. That was, and listen, you're getting used to the NFL. You're getting used to a new side. And again, like that whole offensive line was brilliant this year. We will always bounce back to the Browns because it's a cornerstone of my heart, if you will. And your heart too. That's why you're on this show, because I was like, that guy's a Browns fan. Get him on here. Yes, the age thing's a big deal. So yes, with Anthony Schwartz, you're talking about losing 4 years off the age and then also gaining 3 inches in height, which I think everybody would buy 3 inches on any receiver. And he has, I think, even more speed than Dwayne Eskridge. A lot less on tape as far as dealing with, oddly enough, press man, because again, playing at Auburn, you would think you would at least deal with that a little bit more. But they ran him out of the slot a bit. They weren't afraid to run him outside. It wasn't like an Elijah Moore thing where you didn't see him a lot on the outside. They still would line him up outside, but a lot of the times it was in the situations where it was like, oh, this team's not playing press man in this look. So I liked Anthony Schwartz. I think, again, that's another guy who it's like that 3rd round, 4th round range he's going to probably go in. And a guy who I wouldn't mind if you take that shot on him because of the speed and the developmental aptitude, because he runs runs really well, has a really high, had a good 40. But again, like, you could see the speed on tape. It wasn't a guy who ran fast and then just didn't do it on tape. And it's not like you're spending the pick on John Ross at, pick 9. You're probably spending pick like 69, 90, 100. Any other wide receivers you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'll close it out. I'll give you 2 names of not players, but teams that I think for those 2 guys that you were just sharing a little bit about. Eskridge, I think if he ended up on the Giants, if they chose not to go at Waddle, I think Dave Gettleman is not beyond picking a 24-year-old rookie wide receiver. And with that, I do believe that he would be a well fit in New York if they're looking to add speed to complement that offense in the 3rd round out of a slot receiver. So I like that idea. And then for Schwartz, if we can just keep Schwartz away from Kansas City, that's a good deal for the NFL.
Yes.
Just can't give Andy Reid any more speed or a faster version of McCole Hardman who can catch a little bit better. No competitive football fan of a team wants to be dealing with that when they play the Chiefs do on any given week.
No, you can't
But
have McCole Hardman, Tyreek Hill, and Anthony Schwartz. That's too much speed.
with Travis Kelce to fool around underneath, no, we don't need to see that. It works. It'll work in Madden. I promise you, it'll work in real life. Somebody else needs to step in and make sure that doesn't happen.
I 100% agree.
Yeah. But for me, one guy way down my board, but much higher than consensus, is a player from Arkansas State, Jonathan Adams Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really big fan of his. I think when he ran, he didn't run the fastest 40. He was a bottom 4.5 guy, but jumped 41 inches in his vertical. And for a guy at 6'4" to be doing that and get so much production as an ex-basketball player of catches above the rim or high pointing balls, even against Big 12 defenses when Arkansas State got that matchup, just an incredible player. I don't necessarily think the fit is perfect with the Browns in their position of need, but if he can end up on a team like the Washington football team where they're looking for an receiver who's a devastating blocker. There's one clip where he blocks 4 people in one play on a sweep that goes to the left, where he takes the cornerback, knocks over the free safety, picks up a linebacker, knocks over a defensive lineman in succession. I've not seen a better clip other than maybe Jalen Waddle and his Missouri tape. But just really big fan of his. I hope he gets a good fit because I think he can be very successful in the NFL.
Sick. I like that idea. Have you guys who we haven't touched on with who I think have been talked about a lot? Amari Rogers, Kadarius Toney, Shi Smith, who I think he was another guy who had a little bit of a good Senior Bowl moment early on. Desmond Fitzpatrick, Marcus Stevenson. Let's see if anybody else. Any of those names? Oh, and then obviously Amon-Ra St. Brown. Any of those names kind of excite you? Tickle your fancies?
I get really interested by a player like Amari Rogers or his teammate Cornell Powell. I think both of them stepped out last year and did a little bit differently than what they had shown on tape before. I think Amari Rogers projects a little bit better to the NFL just because of his speed is a little bit better and his refinement as a receiver in the slot. His dad is currently the wide receivers coach for the Baltimore Ravens, as he was at Tennessee once upon a time working as a coach. But I think that's an interesting dynamic for a family, but also in a bloodline perspective. But for Amari, working with Trevor Lawrence, I think he can find a niche in the NFL where he'll be successful in his own right. I don't think it's reuniting with Lawrence in Jacksonville. If that happens, is they have Laviska Shenault, some other wide receivers that can really do that role the same way. And I don't really have one that comes to mind with that group, but also Marquez Stevenson. He's a little bit older, not as old as Eskridge, but played well at the Senior Bowl, an offensive weapon at Houston. I really like him and his game.
Yeah, well, Rodgers, I think the thing that Rodgers showed really good with was the he's tough to tackle. He had really good hands, really good short area quickness. Like those things play well in the NFL. He's almost kind of like a running back in that. Like if you're looking for say like a cheaper version of Jarvis Landry, like or
a more athletic version.
I mean, I don't know how much. I guess I don't even know necessarily more athletic because he wasn't like. I just think like the younger version of Jarvis even because like Jarvis back early stage Jarvis had a lot more juice run after catch, and also part of it comes down to usage. Like back when he was playing for the Miami Dolphins, he was just taking stuff from like that 5 yards within the line of scrimmage and just taking it 10, 15 yards. At one point, I think he had the most yards after catch in the NFL. And that was beating out any running back. And it was him, Odell, and then like 6 running backs. So weird that both those guys are on the Browns. And then I don't think now they're on a team that doesn't do a lot of short routes for their wide receivers, at least not in that general way. As far as it goes with Amari Rogers, though, the guy who just retired today, Julian Edelman. Like that's kind of what I sometimes saw with him was just that if you got him to be in an offense where you're running a lot of option routes, and you can get him to do that not something that they did at Clemson, but something that, like, if he picked that up, he went to a team like the Patriots that ran that kind of an offense. I think that would be kind of an interesting maneuver of, like, that would utilize his skill set so well. Kadarius Toney is one that gets mentioned a lot, and I don't think either of us have really mentioned anything about him. My issue with Kadarius Toney is he reminds me of Andy Isabella, the guy who got drafted by the Arizona Cardinals, went late second round. Is kind of a slot/gadget guy, but doesn't do a particular thing that, like, you can see, like, projecting necessarily. Like, he's like, I not projecting. Like, he's going to get a lot of run after catch if you utilize him correctly, but his route running is a little erratic. He does, like, the little head bob thing a little too much sometimes. But
Yeah,
like,
and he's a new player to the wide receiver room. Came to Florida as a quarterback, and so he's learning as he goes. But if we were talking about how Jalen Waddle and Elijah Moore stood out on tape when you were watching them, Kadarius Toney and Kyle Pitts did that at Florida.
yes,
They were both very exciting players that had Kyle Trask at quarterback, which was an interesting situation. But that NFL talent couldn't be denied. They were both very productive in their roles. I don't think that Toney is like the four first wide receivers that we talked about, is above a scheme fit or a situation where he'll be able to outproduce or produce in any situation. So that's why I don't really rank him within that same tier. But if we could handpick a place for him to go with a caveat rule that's created, yeah, he'll be a stud. But just have some hesitations as the draft proceeds about buyer beware a little bit for him.
yeah, because, like, they utilized him a lot on, like, kind of gadget plays and getting him on motion, and I think the ability of what you could, honestly, Kansas City, another, I think first off, any player is going to do well in Kansas City, but specifically a team that likes to use a lot of the gadget plays like Kansas City, I think that would be a team that would fit him very well. Teams that like to utilize a lot of motion, that have a 3 wide receiver set involved, maybe not even 3 wide receiver set, because, like, if you're talking about a team like the Browns, my worry with Kadarius Toney's not necessarily, like, it's landing spot, but it's more along the lines of how high is the landing spot. Like, if he's going first round, that's way too high because you're putting up way too high expectations.
Right.
But there's part of, like, the Curtis Samuel element to his game where it's
Yeah.
kind of like that, like, he could develop in that role of learning how to be an outside receiver, but also would probably be more productive in the slot and on those kind of motion, pre-snap motion movements. So getting him freed up.
And as we're talking about wide receivers, there is one more name that I want to bring up more so than the rest. In a lot of the similar role that we were talking about, of guys that I have kind of in that same tier as Rondale Moore, Kadarius Toney. This one is actually situated right between the two, Rondale Moore being the higher ranked one. Emir Smith-Marset from Iowa is a really, really, really fun player, has tremendous amounts of experience on special teams. So I do like him a little bit more because of that, as a returner. Electric returner, very fast. His 40 time wasn't as impressive as what you saw on film, so I don't know really what that is about, or like where his background is for the speed. But like I shared a little bit about Nico Collins, about the quarterback situation. His time at Iowa, Smith-Marset that is, didn't really have the best quarterback play. But if we're looking at guys who can play not the X receiver, but that Z receiver, the F receiver, moving around, getting yards after catch, created touches, he's a bigger guy that I necessarily would choose over the other two in different situations and schemes. I really like him if the Browns want to look wide receiver at the beginning of round 4 at pick 110. He's one of my favorites there.
Nice. Last guy I wanted to talk about, I think, let me just make sure. At least as far as my list goes. And if you have any other guys you want to throw in, let me know. Amon-Ra St. Brown, who got a little bit of hype before the season. This season was okay, but I think some of his gameplay from, again, another guy who 2019 looked a bit better. And I think maybe it's because the competition was a little bit better. The Notre Dame game kind of popped out to me a little bit. He kind of reminds me of Juju Smith-Schuster and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside a little bit in that mold where I think Arcega-Whiteside or Arcega-Whiteside, which sounds like I have a list, but that's just how you're supposed to pronounce his name, apparently, because it's spelt with a C. But that is, I think he'd probably be a better, like, utilized as a big slot player. Now, technically, Amon-Ra St. Brown's not necessarily big as a big slot, but he plays big. And he's a guy who, if you get him on those free releases, shows very smooth route running ability, can get downfield quick, and is pretty good on the contested catch portion of it. I think the Eagles might be a team that would value him now that they got rid of Alshon Jeffrey. Although, granted, I mentioned Arcega-Whiteside, and then I'm going ahead and going, yeah, go ahead and get Amon-Ra St. Brown because that worked out so well for you the first time.
Even before you continue on, I'm working on a mock draft right now, which is some of my ideas for different fits and stuff. I have the Eagles not looking at wide receiver at the top of the draft, just taking value at where they can get because they have some talent. They have voids of talent across their roster. And so it came down to Amon St. Brown as a wide receiver available on round 3 for them. And I really like that fit. Tylan Wallace just won a couple picks before, which was unfortunate for them. But I do like that fit in Philly, that ability to float inside and outside. He was much more productive in the slot as a slot receiver. Now, I don't think it's the all perfect fit because Jalen Reagor would hopefully be able to rotate and be a piece that they can move together in that offense. But it fits a need for them, gives them more talent to the wide receiver room that they're desperately searching for.
Another team I could think of is maybe a team that runs the McVay system, where the old McVay system. So basically the Bengals, which, if the Bengals want some free advice, it sounds like they've had some issues over the years. So, Browns fans will give you some help. We're right. Totally fine on you guys getting better. Listen, you guys play the Steelers and the Ravens twice a year. You should win a couple of games. In fact, I remember that Bengals-Steelers game. And I was kind of rooting for the Bengals in that game because it was way more fun.
I think the Bengals won that game, if I can remember correctly.
Yes, they did, with Finley.
With the backup quarterback.
That just says something to you right there when Ryan Finley's your quarterback. By the way, he's not their quarterback anymore. He's gone. He's now, I think, on the Texans. So, but yeah, when Ryan Finley's your quarterback and he's winning you games against the Steelers, which had this weird, ridiculous defense, and then all of a sudden it's like they fell apart. Everything about the Steelers fell apart at the end of the year. We could probably spend a good hour talking about how much the Steelers fell apart. But if they didn't have 16 guys of all the same size and build and shape, I think that's the problem. Is that. I think he's a faster version of those kind of style players. I think he's a faster Tyler Boyd. That's kind of how I can see him. Now, the only thing is you already have Tyler Boyd there, so that's not going to help you. You also have T. Higgins, who a little bit different, but again, still kind of you need a different kind of element to that roster. But maybe Joe Brady would like that kind of a player because, again, especially because they don't really have a tight end, they're probably going to be running a lot more 3 and 4 wide receiver sets.
Yep.
Going spread a little bit, because that was actually something even Joe Brady did. Especially because you have Christian McCaffrey and Mike Davis. McCaffrey didn't play much last year, but because what they had with LSU with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, then Joe Brady going to Carolina, having McCaffrey and Mike Davis. I could see them utilizing another big slot receiver like that, especially if they're not going to go wide receiver early. If they take Sewell or Slater in the top 10, or even trade back and get one of the offensive linemen. If they're going to attack offensive line early, I could see them taking a guy like that, who you have DJ Moore, who's already on the outside. You have Robbie Anderson, who's taking the top off of defenses. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown. I've talked myself into it. Carolina, go do it already. Not night of the draft, not now. Any last thoughts? Any wide receivers that you have on your list? I know I'd mentioned Shi Smith before, but I don't really have much. He was a Senior Bowl guy, kind of. I think he's going to be mostly a slot player, and at the next level, kind of going to be that day 3 kind of pickup. But outside of him, any other guys that you have on your list?
No, but I just have some closing remarks. I think anyone in the top 4 you can't make a wrong choice with.
This
They'll
is
all
true.
be productive players for your team. If you're looking for explosive playmakers, big and small, they come across this class. I think this class offers a lot of different pieces for any offense. I think it does favor more gadget players than outside dominant skill players. So I do expect that Terrence Marshall, a Nico Collins, a Tylan Wallace type player will be gone far before I believe their perceived value in my mind is, just by that need and need across the league for those spots. But if you're looking down the draft board for those slot players, whether that be Cornell Powell, Tutu Atwell, Shai Smith, different players like that, those players will be, for me, where the value is in that class. One of the reasons why, if I was Andrew Berry or could ever talk to Andrew Berry, one of the questions that I would ask him is that if you could get one of those top receivers at the top of your draft, you're well situated to then pick whatever wide receiver you want later on day 3, whether that be Anthony Schwartz or Tutu Atwell. I know that they have been linked to him, even though he's not the biggest, and you could see that every time you watch him. But
yeah, I think didn't he measure in like 155 or something?
Yep.
That's tiny. That's gonna be a hard time. You're a gadget player at that point. I honestly thought he was mostly gonna be in that mid-round range anyway. I know there were talks about him being a top 50 player. I thought that was a little rich. There's always talks about guys being top 50 players or first round. There's like 60 first round players every year.
Yeah, that the best part about that is that come draft night, there'll be articles out there about 100 different players that are going to get drafted in the first round. But unfortunately for them, but fortunately for football fans, there's only 32 players that can go that night, and somebody's bound to get value the rest. Something that I'm really looking forward to is, those Belichick, those different moments where these general managers go out to fill their needs and overdraft these positions, which gives success to these players that are being drafted, but allows some of that top tier talent to tumble down the boards and really surprise you by the end of day 1 and going into day 2 and 3.
And again, we just talked about, like, if we miss somebody on somebody's list, I'm sorry. Wide receiver is the deepest position. Like, I think it is the deepest position, in at least offensively, in the NFL, and it's the position that gets drafted the most. So there's definitely players we're gonna forget, or we might have only touched upon for a second. But if you want, you could follow this guy on Twitter. Go ahead, drop your Twitter to Marcus Harvey.
Yeah, Marcus Harvey _ MarcusHarvey _ follow me on Twitter for anything Browns, but even more so football and other NFL draft coverage.
And thanks again for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. Love this discussion about all the wide receivers. It's an exhausting discussion, and the Browns is an exhausting. So 2 exhausting discussions. Just
well worth my time. Always love to talk about football and learn something new.
I'm just beating you up here. But thank you so much for coming on. If you want, you guys can follow the podcast at Draftvice on Twitter, at Draftvice _football on Instagram. You can follow me at BROJO. Death is in the end of life. Punch like a delicious drink you drink in the summer. And follow, subscribe. These are going to be there's going to be episodes all this week and next week, all leading up to the draft now, finally. I know I've been very slow on getting these out. Now these are going to be coming out fire. Thank you for coming on again, and everybody have a nice day.
We're on to
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And about the past and about the future.
Thank you, Mr. Marcus Harvey. Thank you for coming on. You can follow the podcast at Draftvice on Twitter, at Draftvice _football on Instagram. You can follow me at BROJO. Death is in the end of life. Punch a delicious drink you drink in the summer. Our next episode will be Edge Rushers, folks. And that might just be an exclusive me, but don't worry, we'll have more guests on, some in-studio guests again, finally. And then, yes, tune back in for the next episode, which should be dropping tomorrow-ish time, Thursday, I guess this would be. So go ahead, check it out. Have a good day, folks.
We're on to
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And about the past and about the future.